Or YouTube channel. If you go to youtube.com/WJ Live, it's really easy to find. Hit that subscribe button and click on the bell, and you'll be notified every time a new episode of WJ Live comes up. We see our numbers every day, of course. We pay attention to those kinds of things. And we see every day we've got lots of people who watch us who aren't subscribed. That subscription really helps us out. So please click on that button, click on that bell, and help us out. And now, on to the topics of the day. So, as many of you have probably seen, there was a huge flaw uncovered in Georgia elections in Floyd County, northwestern Floyd County. 2,600 ballots were found that had never been counted. They'd just not been, I guess, uploaded from a memory card. I was about to sound like a Bostonian. From a memory card. Just overlooked for whatever reason, didn't get uploaded. 2,600 votes. Of course, these votes broke strongly for President Trump, basically 2-1, about 1,643 votes for President Trump, according to the Georgia Secretary of State's office, 865 for former Vice President Biden, and 16 for the Libertarian candidate Joe Jorgensen. So that's about 778 additional votes for Donald Trump that he has picked up and will be reflected in the certified result, according to Gabe Sterling, who's with the Secretary of State office in Georgia. In the wake of this, it's really seemed to reveal some rifts in the Georgia GOP that were really kind of surprising. So Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who is a Republican, called Representative Doug Collins, who is a Republican, a liar because of things that Collins said about the election results in Georgia and the process in Georgia. Collins, of course, is helping to head up Trump's recount efforts in the state. Collins then called Raffensperger incompetent, and both the incumbent senators in Georgia, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, both of whom are in a runoff election in January, again, both Republicans, have called on Raffensperger to resign. Sterling, again, one of the folks at the state's Secretary of State's office, called on the county elections director to resign. So there's plenty of blame, plenty of finger pointing going on here. It is sort of disturbing to find 2,600 ballots in an election that is a state elections that's so close. It's about 14,000 ballots. This is like, one ballot out of every 6, roughly. Mm-hmm. I just did that in my head, but something like that. 1/6 of the margin suddenly, come out of thin air. Who do you blame for this? Who, in all of this finger pointing, who do you look at and say, okay, buck stops with this guy. He needs to take the blame for it. Andrew?
I mean, I think, of course, the county needs to be blamed, and the folks who were, it needs to be looked into with regard to the folks who were on the ground working those machines. Now, that's all well and good to say, but at the end of the day, it does need to fall on the Secretary of State. And I mean that in every state, whether it's a Republican in charge or a Democrat in charge, they're in charge of the election. And when you're in charge of something, at the end of the day, even if the gross negligence is, downstream from you, sometimes you have to take the blame for that. Most of the time, you should be taking the blame for that if you're a good leader, right? And that's easy for me to say as someone who's low level up here. But, I mean, that's the case. And so I think people are confused when they're saying, or just being incredibly disingenuous when they're saying that in states where Republicans hold Secretary of State, Republicans should be trusting the results because it's a Republican Secretary of State. And it's like, well, if it all falls on your head, it doesn't matter what party you're from, you're counting number one. You're thinking for yourself.
Sure. And
if it falls on you, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're worried about the results and how your office will look as a result. So I think that the scrutiny needs to fall on the Secretary of States, no matter what party they're from, and we need to kind of dispense with the notion that if it's a Republican-led Secretary of State's office, that and the results go against Trump in the state, that suddenly means that there is no questions to be asked.
Brian, you like to point a finger or two once in a while. Who would you be aiming at in this situation?
First, I'm going to say, I'll look there. Please don't turned this off yet, but I actually do think some blame can actually be placed on Trump and his administration.
Okay, why would you say that?
They've had 4 years now, because like Trump has been claiming voter fraud for 4 years now, and it just feels to me like I'm obviously not an expert, I'm not sure what more they could have done, because I know Trump did commission some looks into voter fraud, and they mostly yielded nothing, and it feels like GOP leadership were kind of just content with that and just let it be. But as like I said, 2,600 is not an insignificant number of ballots to just find, and for mistakes like that to be occurring now when there have been accusations being flung about voter fraud for 4 years now.
Yeah,
it feels like, and again, like I know blaming Trump is a little hot takey, but really what I mean is just like, I guess leadership in general. It feels like more could have been done going into this, especially knowing how contentious this was going to be. Like no matter who wins or won,
right, and that just makes it worse. I mean. Everybody knew that these results were going to be under a microscope, and so the idea that there's some guy or woman, I have no idea, in northwestern Floyd County, Georgia, who just forgets. Oh, I forgot about this memory card with 2,600. If I were one of those 2,600 people, I'd be really ticked off. I mean, I'd be calling for somebody's head. But you make a good point, and I think sort of I mentioned the rifts in the Georgia Republican Party earlier. There is this dividing line still very much in the Republican Party between the Trump supporters and and actually there are probably several camps here: Trump supporters, never Trumpers, people sort of in the middle, more establishment figures. And all of them have different opinions, right, about where this thing's going and what things are going to look like in December when the Electoral College finally votes, and then in January, of course, for the inauguration. Does the uncovering of these 2,600 votes do anything to change your mind or change your view of what this election looks like? Does this add to the possibility of a Trump victory? Does it take away from it? What do you think?
I definitely think it adds to the possibility of a Trump victory. I'm not sure how much. I do think, I want to say most sensible Americans have always sort of assumed nothing necessarily nefarious, but general incompetence. Well, there's always been some election, fraud for lack of a better term, but election fraud has always existed.
Anything run by the government is going to be rife with incompetence.
Yes. So, I don't know how many people just kind of assumed like this is almost baked into the margins, but it does feel that Trump's case, I mean, whether or not you think that those 2,600 ballots or, the however many of that Trump had received, whether or not you think that makes it an actual final difference, at the very least, I think it certainly strengthens Trump's case that, something happened this election.
Votes.
Exactly.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think mathematically speaking, when you get at the numbers, if you're down, every vote that's going to get counted from there on out is important to you. And if thousands of votes are being left off the table or are being discovered to be put on the table, obviously that's going to up your chances. I mean, it just gives you a little bit more hope. Whether or not that's going to come out in the wash, that's to be determined. I personally, I want to be very careful on like what I would say is going to happen. I mean, I think a couple days after the election, I was one of the people who was more willing to say, I think this might be over for President Trump. But I mean, I think that these results make it far more likely that at least the fight that he's putting up and the legal battles that he's putting up, that's shut me up on that issue.
Yeah.
It is at the very least shut up someone like me who has said, well, maybe he's fighting improperly or he's overdoing it. Maybe there's no fire where the smoke is at here. But there clearly is. There's a reason to keep counting.
I think Brian and I are in favor of anything that shuts you up. So
we're
very
keep those votes coming.
Whoever found these 2,600 votes.
I do actually want to point out one observation that I've noticed, when I was sort of digging into the story. And honestly, this is I cast no aspersions. This is such a small county. I've already forgotten what it's called. Something Floyd.
Floyd County.
Yeah, Floyd County.
Northwestern Floyd County,
Western-
Georgia.
I do think if something nefarious is happening, it's gonna happen on the fringes in places like that.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really.
That's a good point, Brian.
Yeah, I don't think you can really. I mean, I'm sure you could, but it's just your margin of error is so much slimmer if you're trying to cheat a massive county.
Yeah, and this doesn't even bring in really the idea of election fraud. I mean, that's not really what we're talking about. We could be. I suppose it's possible that there's somebody in northwestern Floyd County who's, super pro Biden and knows that these votes were gonna break Trump's way. I haven't heard even an accusation of that, much less seen any evidence of it. So we're not necessarily talking about any sort of fraud here, but it does open up the possibility of errors that need to be found and addressed. And I think that's a big part of what the Trump campaign's been arguing all along.
At the very least, as you've brought up, George, let's double check the government, the incompetency.
Always a good idea.
Let us have an eye in.
Yes.
Yeah, always a good idea. So establishment folks probably weren't very happy with this result, Andrew.
Absolutely not. And I think that kind of gets at a far more important question, whether Trump wins or not. At the end of the day, whether it's right now or whether it's 4 years from now, we're going to need on the conservative end of the spectrum to decide who is next to carry the standard, to carry the banner for the conservative movement. Is it going to be someone more establishment-esque, or is it going to be someone more Trump-esque? Is it going to be a fighter? And I think that's kind of the dichotomy that's been drawn, at least for me, is that you have, in the political class, you have public servants, people who are going to go and fight for the American people and their will, whether it is what that representative wants or not. And you're going to have self-servants. And these self-servants, unfortunately, have been absolutely plaguing the system for decades. I mean, as long as I grew up, watching, I have the utmost respect for John McCain for his military service, but watching John McCain and Mitt Romney as I was growing up, these were folks who were just like the establishment political class. They wanted to be basking in the Beaumont. They wanted to be smoking cigars in smoke-filled rooms and sipping on cocktails in a Washington, D.C. that is absolutely separate from the rest of the heartland and from, the more average American. And nowhere do you have a better example of that than in the McCain family. These are folks who already want to write off the result and say, Trump has lost. Cindy McCain, the widow of Senator John McCain, is in Joe Biden's transition team for the presidency. And so we're seeing kind of this establishment class, whether it's they don't want to fight for President Trump, they don't want to fight for the potential that a conservative victory may still come out of this. And at the very least, going forward, if that is the case, or if it is not, they want to be part of the kind of moderate Democratic wing that's fighting this president. And we've seen that very surprisingly in a report from The Atlantic that it seems as though in former President Barack Obama's upcoming book, we're going to see some claims that John Boehner and John McCain both spoke ill of fellow members of the Republican caucus and of the conservative base in 2008 and in 2010 and in 2012. We have a quote from Barack Obama here from that report. Look, this comes out more in volume 2 of his book. I will be more explicit on this, but
I don't know if I'm going to make it to the second volume of Barack Obama's memoirs.
Yeah, 700 plus pages of that.
I'll give it a shot, but I just don't know that that's going to happen.
No. So, what he's getting at here, but take John Boehner, for example. He and I had a perfectly good relationship, but he had to act a certain way for his caucus. He would badmouth many of them to me in private, much as John McCain did. The issue was never personal. And now, I have absolutely no problem believing a claim like that that there was that kind of bad-mouthing behind the scenes, because we've seen, like I said, Cindy McCain and Meghan McCain get behind Joe Biden. We saw in a Hill report this week, Cindy McCain say that essentially while she was jet-setting overseas once a month to do charity work in various countries overseas, as a lot of the political class does, it's most a vacation and very little charity work being done. She said, I was overseas at least once a month, if not more. I'd watch the demise of respect for our country around the globe. Watch us leave our allies on the battlefield. Watch us throw away our treaties. You say, well, we're better than that. But finally, there comes a time when there's no explanation anymore, and that was very much the case with me. There were so many people like my husband and so many millions of other people who served so nobly, and then to have it tossed away by someone who I don't believe really understands what it means to serve. Now, you can call Trump self-serving for myriad reasons. There are plenty of reasons to believe that, but I do believe that he fought for this country. And so, what I want to ask you guys,
there is no president. And I haven't looked up this number, but I would put very good money on it that there's no president who has lost as much of his personal fortune to serve as president of this country.
No question.
Every other president, certainly in modern memory, gets out of office and becomes rich if they weren't rich going in. Trump has spent, lost easily millions of dollars. He will probably claim more than that. But certainly he's lost millions of dollars. And it's not like after being president, now he can get book deals.
Yeah.
Now he can be a TV show host.
He could do it all before.
He could do all that before. So he's gained nothing there as opposed to the Obamas, the Clintons, who, have cleaned up afterwards. So, the idea of him not sacrificing at least, he didn't go to Vietnam. Okay. But for these past 4 years, there's no question. There's no question.
And so what I want to ask you guys is, I think we're fearing about the election results. What I'm worried about is that this rhino class of folks who claim conservatism and do not fight for conservatism for Heartland America, that they're going to reclaim the party. I mean, is that something that you guys are worried about?
Yes. To be clear, I just want to make one thing clear. I have no problem with Republicans endorsing Democrats or vice versa.
Sure.
I've always believed, policy over partisanship. Mm-hmm. The problem with the McCains is that the policy is also bad. And the policies they're getting behind are also bad.
Right.
So yes, in essential, I do worry that rhinos will sort of try to reclaim the party. But there is also, you could even just see it down ballot on election night. The number of candidates who won, who, for lack of a better term, adopted a Trumpian misdemeanor.
Yep.
There's something to that. I don't think it's going to lessen. I think we're only seeing more of that. And to be clear, by Trumpian demeanor, I don't mean just the attitude and the verbiage that Trump uses. I also mean
the America First.
Yeah, America First. The policies that I'm not the number one Trump fan that George might be, but I think Trump has phenomenal policies. The policies of Trump were never the issue for me,
right?
And I think those policies are going to trickle down, and we'll see. Because another thing I noticed is down ballot, a lot of younger Republicans won.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
That is really hopeful that they can fight off kind of that dying legacy class of Republicans that we have unfortunately come to know and not love.
Yeah. Now, I think one thing that needs to be taken into account, assume worst case scenario, assume that a Joe Biden administration starting in January, Donald Trump will remain a force to be reckoned with in American politics. He will have a bully pulpit until he dies.
Yeah, that's a king-making figure in the Republican Party forever.
Exactly. So I think George W. Bush, when he left the presidency, he really stepped back out of politics. So did Barack Obama, actually. Most former presidents do, at least for a period. Now, some will come back a little later. Jimmy Carter, probably the best example of that in modern memory.
Good old Jimmy.
But Trump's not going to do that. Trump's not going to go, retire to Kennebunkport, and he is going to remain loud and proud. And whether or not, there's all this talk of if he doesn't win re-election this year, that he'll consider a 2024 run. I don't know whether to believe that or not. But it almost doesn't matter. He will remain center stage and will continue to be a force to be reckoned with in the Republican Party.
I do think at the very least, those rumors of Trump starting his own network,
news network.
I think that alone will make sure that he is at the very least a big influence on the Republican Party for years to come.
He doesn't need to start his own news network. He can just come to Western Journal.
Exactly. There's
hang out with us.
Here.
He can have my office. I'll take another office. I'd be all right with that.
I'll share an office with you.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that.
And the last question I want to ask you guys on that topic is then going forward, I mean, we saw in this election, just from the kind of the initial numbers that we're seeing, that the working class and those heartland Americans really they reclaimed a big part of the pie when it came to the electorate on the right of center. How do they, going forward, how do they ensure that there is a focus on strength going forward? How do they ensure that the cultural conflict, the culture war still matters in the party? I mean, who's the candidate? What does the movement look like? Does it look more like the Tea Party, the early 2000s Republican Party? What is it?
I think that's a really good question, Andrew, and I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm going to cheat a little bit, actually, and go back to my previous answer and say part of what that looks like continues to be Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But there is danger in that because it cannot all be centered around one man. I mean, Donald Trump is not a young man. He seems to be in great health. I hope that we have him around for a long time, but we're not going to have him around forever. No. And so we do need this breed of younger Republicans to come up, to take leadership positions, to be vocal, and to win elections. And we need heartland Americans, Republicans, Trump voters, to go out and support those people even when Trump isn't on the ballot. Yes. That's going, whether that's 2024, 2028, whenever that is, that's going to be absolutely vital. Yeah.
To answer your question, Andrew, I will look towards one of my favorite states in America, and that's Texas. I am a particularly huge...
I thought he was going with Hawaii.
Me too, I was going to say.
Well, Hawaii's my favorite.
I don't know why you'd look there for Republican leadership.
No. Hawaii's my favorite, but I wouldn't look there for Republican leadership. So in Texas, I'm a big fan of Dan Crenshaw. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I think he's got that balance of not youth per se, but he can connect with younger people.
Yeah,
no problem.
Absolutely.
And plus, having a president with an eye patch, that's just cool.
Super
That's
cool.
That'd
super
be cool.
It's just right.
And I'm also not sure what role exactly he would fill. And there's a part of me that thinks maybe that his time has passed already, but he's not old by any stretch. There's also Ted Cruz.
Yep.
Who, for anyone who was watching I believe the Tech Titans were getting grilled again.
They were, yeah.
Cruz was
Cruz did his
particular.
normal excellent job of that, yeah.
Yep. So I would say I think I see some hope in Texas as far as future GOP leadership.
Excellent.
One place that I don't see much potential for future leadership is this growing issue of class culture or cancel culture in America.
Yeah. It's also not in class culture, but yeah. But yes.
So the issue I saw today that was brought up, it's actually I think a couple days old, but I'm not hip with the youths.
It's still
a major problem
around out there, yeah.
So Star Wars actress on The Mandalorian, Gina Carano, she has been under fire lately. The hashtag Fire Gina Carano has been trending because of a couple of tweets, fairly innocuous tweets in my opinion. The first one was just a simple meme, nothing really much to it. Democratic government leaders now recommends we all wear blindfolds along with masks so we can't see what's really going on. Like, yeah,
that's pretty funny.
Yeah, a chuckle. I don't know if that's sinister by any stretch. It's just what it is. What it is. Yeah,
move on.
Right.
And then the other one I found even more kind of amazing that it drew outrage. She tweeted out, "We need to clean up the election process so we are not left feeling the way we do today." Fair point. Put laws in place that protect us against voter fraud, investigate every state, film the counting, flush out the fake votes, require ID, make voter fraud end in 2020, fix the system.
Good for everyone.
Hard
to see anything to argue with.
Yeah.
in that list.
Those all seem like very salient points.
If you're interested in honest elections, those all seem reasonable.
Yes.
Yep. Unfortunately for Carano, for kind of presenting that. For presenting logic.
Right. You're right.
Cancel culture is coming after her hard.
Logic has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. I do think cancel culture might be the worst thing that's kind of arisen since. I mean, George, you're much older than I am. When would you say that? When do you remember like partisanship politics really taking? I want to say the Obama era is when partisanship really became an issue.
All right. So,
You look very young today, George.
thank you. Don't even. It's too late for that. It's gonna get worse in a minute. You'll see.
Oh boy.
To me, I saw it really happen under Clinton. Is where the seeds were sown. Clinton enjoyed so much this feeling that he had this mandate, and he was just very willing to, and he was very popular, very charismatic politician, and he was just very willing to kind of throw that in the Democrats' face. It was, you guys won't remember this, but I will never forget Bill Clinton showing up on the Arsenio Hall show. This really dates me now.
Yeah, it does.
Playing the saxophone. He came on playing the saxophone. He didn't come on, talk for a while, and then get up and play the saxophone. The band was playing, and as I recall, and this was many years ago, but as I recall, the stage spun around and revealed it was Bill Clinton on sax. That's how I recall it. Now, it was many years ago, so maybe I got that wrong. But either way, it was a very cool introduction of this guy. I remember him talking to a group of college students, and they were allowed to ask him questions. And one of the young ladies in the audience asked him, "Boxers or briefs?" That was not a question that you ask a president of the United States or a presidential candidate, right? And he answered it to my chagrin. I mean, I would, you don't need to be rude to the young lady, but you can just say, I don't think this form's appropriate for this conversation.
He doesn't know where it's appropriate.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, with Bill Clinton, he would have found somewhere appropriate to answer that question, I'm sure. But so he was just cool, and in a way that appealed to the youth. And the Republicans of that time were really stereotyped as old and
stodgy.
kind of stodgy and dried up. And that's when I recall it really getting ugly, even under Reagan, who was very, set in his ways, very determined on what he wanted to do. He was able to reach across the aisle, work with Tip O'Neill, who was every bit the Democrat that Reagan was the Republican. And then it really broke down when George Bush won, and we had a situation similar to what we have today. 35 days, 37 days, whatever it was, in Florida when they were recounting and recounting and recounting. And from then on, George W. Bush became the illegitimate president because the Supreme Court had to weigh in and crown him or whatever. And so therefore the Supreme Court stole the election from the American people, and George Bush was illegitimate. He was illegitimately reelected apparently 4 years later. But from that point on, it's I think gotten worse every election.
So that's kind of that's where the origins of cancel culture, I believe, really stem from. Andrew, how do you think it got so bad? Like, why do you think it is such the prevalent force in today's culture that it is? I mean, it doesn't take much to get someone canceled these days.
No. I think it's twofold, and it is one thing that I touched on in my segment, and it is it's two things that I love to harp on. It's that establishment rhino class of folks who did not want to fight, who still do not want to fight, and it is unfortunately similarly that class, but really the Republican Party on the whole, like you were talking about, George, they were stereotyped as that kind of old, crotchety, smoke-filled rooms, very,
not Dan
plain. No, exactly. Not exciting, not interesting, not unique in any way, not young. As much as I hate the sloganeering of the modern left, it serves a purpose to be able to sloganeer and to reach younger audiences and to reach across the aisle and really excite people. I mean, we saw that with Barack Obama. And so unfortunately, the Republican Party's inability to kind of get downwind and get into the culture and present our ideas as just as acceptable in the culture as the left's ideas is a problem. And then the inability to at any point recognize that things were turning around and getting ahead of us as conservatives and fight back and try to claw it back and then insert our ideas is the problem.
When I was very young in ancient Greece, in Athens, in I think the 6th century BC, So 2,700 years ago.
So you're like 21 back then?
Yeah, exactly. I had just gotten out of the army. They had a process called Ostrich Kismos, which I love to be able to geek out on Greek. But that Ostrich Kismos is basically was a time when all the Athenian citizens came together in the city and they would vote once a year to find one person that they didn't like and cast them out of the city for 10 years. And they had to get, I think, 6,000 votes, so there had to be like a quorum. But whoever got the most votes, as long as they passed whatever that threshold was, they were out. They were gone for 10 years.
Now.
I was like, that wouldn't bode well for Andrew.
So what that tells you, that word, by the way, ostrachismos, is where we get ostracized.
Yep.
Yeah, ostracism. So what that tells you is a couple of things. One, this has been a part of who people are for a very long time, right? This is not, cancel culture is new in the way we do it, but cancel culture is very much a product of social media, right? It wasn't even really possible to do, before we had Twitter and Facebook and media from which these people could be canceled, right? I'm not going to listen to them on Twitter anymore. In some ways, you could look at Athens and go, is that a good way? Is that some, do we need to have this thing that just sort of purges the undesirable, once a year? I'm not arguing that it is. I just think it's interesting to look at it and go, well, that's, at least a formalized way of doing it rather than all this just sort of rabble rousing.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that always has. I've thought about that many times as cancel culture has sort of grown. As is the existence of cancel culture a symptom of the fact that we don't have a better way of dealing with peoples whose opinions are not valued or welcomed? The problem with Ostrachismos in Athens, one of the problems was that it wasn't just used though to like. Theoretically, it was like for this guy who was accused of being a child molester, but they couldn't prove it, right? And so now you had a way to get him out of the city, even though you couldn't prove it. What it ended up being used for, as you might imagine, is people with unpopular opinions. Yep. So this guy might say something, he might cause trouble later. We need to get rid of this guy, and so they would end up voting him off the island, so to speak. Which is what cancel culture has become today, really.
Yep. Real quick to end, speaking of cancel culture, does Disney fire Gina Carano from The Mandalorian?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we were talking about this before the show. She was on almost the entirety of the first season of The Mandalorian, and she is, from the trailers, going to be in some upcoming episodes on the second season, which is currently airing and still has 7 weeks to go. At that point, what good is dumping her? She'll be, as George said before the show, she'll be with that platform forever unless they want to can the first 2 seasons. They don't. It's one of their most popular programs. It is their most popular program. And at this point, if you get rid of her now, before the 3rd season, what?
It's almost more headache.
She doesn't
than
go
it's
away.
worth.
Yeah, it just creates a huge headache, and people keep seeing her on the platform.
And I don't know, I'm not familiar with her work, but seeing a few images of her today because of this story, all I can say is I would not want to be the Disney executive. She looks pretty buff. I would not want to be the guy tasked with that.
For those not to know, Gina Carano is a former MMA fighter. She probably should have thrown that in there. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Because when I saw her, I thought she reminded me of Ronda Rousey. So that.
Yep. She was a fighter.
Now that makes sense. Who I really only know from Expendables 3. All right. And on that note, we've covered it all today. We've covered a northwestern Floyd County, Georgia incident, all the way to
the Expendables
3, and visited ancient Athens on the way, where you just aren't going to. Where else are you going to find that? Where else are you going to go, even on the vast interwebs, to find that kind of quality? It's just not out there.
It's true.
It's only here at WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Again, you can find us every day, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, every weekday, I should say, Monday through Friday. We'll be on. We'll be live, premiered on YouTube, youtube.com/WJ Live. You can also find us, of course, on Facebook, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. You should be able to find us. Click that subscribe button, click that bell. You'll be notified every time a new episode launches, because who knows when we're going to bring up Athens again. You're not going to want to miss that. So we're very glad, as always, that you joined us here on WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. We'll see you again tomorrow.
The Western Journal has rolled out a brand new subscription model designed specifically for readers like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the